Good afternoon, John. How's it going?
Sherrod, great. Always great to be with you. I'm looking forward to our conversation this afternoon.
Thank you, John. Thanks for coming on the show. So, John, this is a topic that we are going to discuss today, which I'm very passionate about. And I know you are probably 10 times more passionate than me. And the topic is networking, social relationships, using social networks for careers. And I know you've done a lot of work, very original work in the sphere of social relationships and networking. So that's really what the talk is going to be centered around. Before we get into it, I'd like to formally introduce you. And you're a man of so many talents. I don't know if I'll be able to do it. So, John, why don't you talk to us about what do you do and tell us all the things you've done in this realm?
Well, I'll start with how we met, because you were our partner in building Prism Networking. And the purpose of that product is to help people build better relationships so they can have better lives. It's not so they can get the next job. And so, interestingly enough, and I will tell you a little bit more about myself, but the thing that excited me about this conversational opportunity with you is that you wanted to approach relationship building from a sociological perspective as opposed to career advancement. Career success advancement is important, and that's usually what people ask me to speak about. But talking about people moving to a new location, and I have people that work in the relocation industry, and they talk about the C-level exec that is relocated and transferred, and how he or his spouse or she or her spouse really have trouble breaking into a new location. And that seemed to me some of the sociological stuff you were after in this. But going back to the beginning of my career, relationship building and networking has been a foundation of what I do. I worked full-time in college running the rec sports department at the University of Minnesota, and I had a $2 million budget and 400 employees. So I really had to learn how to build relationships and build trust, and clearly put myself in a position to ask people like Sherrod to referee an outdoor broomball match on a Friday night when it's 20 below zero at 11 p.m., right? How am I going to build a relationship with somebody to get them to do that? So I've always been focused in that area. And what we did with Prism was we created a lot of content, assessments, and education to help people become more comfortable building relationships. And then, as you know, because you guys built it, the platform is designed to help somebody operationalize all that teaching and keep track of who they meet. So I think that's kind of enough about me. It's a people focus in my life of why I do things.
Thank you, John. And yes, when we first met, and that was in the context of building software to operationalize some of these concepts of networking. And at the end of the day, it's all data. It's all on a business process. That's how our brain works. We meet somebody, we get their contact info, we stay in touch. Of course, there are a lot of tools out there. I could name enough, like Instagram and Facebook and Snapchat and on, LinkedIn. And we met in that context, and today it's going to be a little bit different, and it's a personal story. And maybe that's where we start. Maybe that's where it makes sense to start this discussion. So as I see it, John, there are two parts to a relationship. One is the initial introduction part. How do you connect with people? The initial contact. That's the first part. If you click, as you and I clicked, then that relationship is further nurtured into, more than just exchanging phone numbers. Then you hang out, then you do things together, maybe play sports, invite, to each other's places, and so on and so forth. So the first step of that process is finding people that you would potentially want to build a relationship with. The relationship could be playing on a team, playing broomball with somebody. It could be working with somebody. That's a career part of it. It could be being romantically involved with somebody. It could be living next to someone and building a neighborly relationship in that sense. So meeting people in your neighborhood. And I think back to the personal story part of it, when I moved to America about 25, actually it's a little bit more than that, 27 years ago, starting from scratch, not knowing anybody, and then really finding people I would enjoy spending time with, And I think that's a very very common problem. I mean, it's not, you don't have to move from India to America to be in that position. I mean, I could move from Minnesota to Arizona. I might probably experience the same challenges. I don't know anybody. So it all starts there. And how do you see this challenge in light of the fact that people work from home now? We do everything online, we shop online. I mean, we don't have to leave home unless we want to. And if you do not leave home and all your relationship becomes these, electronic and cyber and internet relationships, can you really build a relationship? And especially if you're in a new place. So talk to me about that initial challenge of connecting with people in a new place. What role can technology play? Does technology help or hurt, or break that down for us?
Well, first of all, you're right. When you move to a new geographic location, you have a challenge, and you either blessed with going into a workplace with coworkers, or you're on your own. And now
Yep.
you have nobody is helping you unless you move into an apartment complex that has residence events on a monthly basis. That a lot of them do. But Dr. David Hoy, a really close friend of mine, PhD psychologist, did his PhD thesis on how do you help somebody get their next job most effectively. And it came down to confidence. There were a set of skills that the transitioner needed to perform, and I'm not going to go into it. But confidence drives activity, and activity drives results. So if you move into a new location, you're not confident in your own self-identity, you'll keep yourself a little bit more. We talked about that in one of our get-togethers about, you can be left alone here, and it comes with, and we have a lot of this teaching in our platform of Prism, and I'm not here to sell that. But when we worked with a bunch of college students, when we built this course a couple of years ago, they basically said, we don't know how to start conversations. Can you teach us how to start conversations? And you and I talked about the impact or the effect of technology, and the more that an individual does with this small, tiny device in his or her hands, the less they do face-to-face. When you and I were young and we were growing up, we got on our bicycle or you walked and we played a game, and whether it was soccer or baseball or cricket or whatever, you did when you were a young man, we just did things together. And today these kids can have a quasi relationship. It's digital, but they don't get together as often as face to face. And so I'm going to double back to the word confidence is, and it's really funny. I teach my kids this, now they're grown up, is that, look, Sherrod doesn't know you yet. Why don't you say hello and ask him a question? The worst that can happen is he won't answer you. But it's a very, very low risk. You don't want a date or a job. Start a conversation and see where it goes. And I think it's helping these young adults or these people that move to a new location, get them comfortable with their own story. What do they have to say? And a lot of these young kids think, who am I? I'm just a senior, a freshman, or a sophomore. I should keep to myself. And these schools or organizations that have connective activities, right? The first thing when a young student goes to a college or university is creating a sense of belonging. Well, you went a lot further than most, okay? You speak English rather well, right? But you still had to have a sense of belonging, otherwise you wouldn't stay there. What, University of Alabama, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so you establishing that sense of belonging. The same thing if you move to Scottsdale or Minneapolis, right? You have to establish that sense of belonging. So you have to go out there and you have to get engaged. And whether you go to church or whether you join a club or whether there's so many online apps for a hiking club or a skiing club or a drinking bourbon club, whatever it might be, you have to take the first step. Because as you said, maybe in one of our conversations, you can move to Scottsdale and almost never leave your apartment. I mean, you can get everything delivered, groceries, right, and takeout and what have you. So
how does one become confident? I mean, easy to say that, hey, be confident, go talk to people, but then you've got the fear of rejection, you've got the fear of people thinking you're creepy or you're weird and all those things. Like, how do you encourage someone to be confident?
Okay, so and again, I don't want to make this career related, but it is appropriate. Inside Prism, one of our lessons is about building a personal branding statement. So who is Sherrod? What does he like to do? And so, I would advise an adult, young or old, to work on that branding statement, not necessarily to sell themselves, but to discover more about who they really are and how they would describe themselves and opportunities they're interested in. Because your goal, remember we talked about sense of belonging, your goal is to find somebody that you share something in common with, right? Whether it's your faith, whether it's the Minnesota Vikings, whether it's snow skiing, whatever it might be. Relationships start with something in common, in my opinion, right? And so if I get you confident in asking questions to discover, is John like me enough or not, that I would want to have a relationship with him, that took, in my case, many, many hours of conversation, right?
Yep. So it's almost like we should be equipped with our, if I'm the product, I should be equipped with my own elevator pitch at any given time, because you don't know where you will get a chance to sell this product. So I could be at a store, I could be at church, I could be wherever. Boom, here's the elevator pitch. Something that I just said, it's ready, it's rehearsed. Is that what you're saying?
I am, but you're starting on second base. If this is an American baseball analogy, the first thing that you need to have is conversational starting questions to earn the right to be deep enough in the conversation that somebody says, well, Sherrod, tell me about you, right? You have to get the other person to go first, because they're either totally stone dead to not answer your question, like, hey, do you shop here all the time? Or where do you get avocados? Or whatever you can do to get that person to start speaking to you long enough that they might ask you a question, right? Then your elevator pitch on the kind of guy you are and the interests you have, because they're either of interest to you or you're either of interest to them. Or if they learn enough about you, they might have somebody in their network that might say, oh, you like cooking Indian food, or you like picking blueberry, whatever it might be. I've got a friend that does that. You're looking to start a conversation, really, so you guys can get to know each other. And that's one of the things that technology has really made more difficult for these young college-age kids, which are my passion to focus on. They're reluctant to start conversations. Let me just put it that way.
So step one is icebreaker, something that basically verbalizes the intent from either or both sides, that I would like to make that initial connection to see if we connect at any level, which goes into that elevator pitch. So icebreaker and ice breaking, you're right. The icebreaker using technology in LinkedIn and so on, probably a lot easier. And of course, there are some places where you don't want to even attempt ice breaking. I mean, you could be on a hiking trail and two people crossing a path on a hiking trail, there's nobody around. Maybe you just say nice day and keep going. So there are limits to, or are there not?
I'm giggling because I just got back from Scottsdale. I think you knew I was gone. I went hiking 3 times, and once with my son, and then the second time on the same trail with my son and my wife, and then the third time on a different trail. Pausing to rest. If you pause to rest on a hiking trail, somebody else that's moderately out of energy will pause to rest where somebody else is pausing to rest.
Interesting.
And you can ask about, depending on, then you look at what sports hat or shirt they're wearing, and you drive the conversation in that direction, whether you're talking about the Michigan Wolverines or the Crimson Tide of Alabama or what it is. If you've got something that generates some sort of connection with that individual, you'll have a conversation.
Okay. Sounds good. So as our society is becoming more urban, I think it would be fair to say that more and more people over time are going to be living in larger cities rather than small towns. There is still that gradual movement from a farming rural community into an urban setting. Do you think we were better off in a rural setting as a population, as a species, where we had stronger more longer lasting relationships where we grew up with people. Our parents grew up with their parents and grandparents and so on. And this was a farm handed down over generations. And we had this very, very strong sense of community, a very, very strong sense of, what's the word that you used, of belonging. Now go to a city, how many millions of people, tens of millions perhaps, you don't know anybody. There's an old, not an old movie, but maybe in the past 15 years or so, a George Clooney movie. I forget the name. He would travel all the time, and he was practically living out of his suitcase. And he was talking to his sister from the airport, and the sister says, "But brother, you're lonely." And he looks around the airport. He's like, "Sis, what are you talking about? I'm always surrounded by people." So I forget the name of the movie, but is this urbanization hurting us in being social?
I'm going to give an answer, but in a way, I'm going to put it back on you in just a second. In that, first of all, my mom's side of the family here in Minnesota did come from a farming background in southeastern Minnesota. They moved here from Norway and those regions in the mid to late 1800s, 1870, 1860. Those people were adventurers. My father's family, my father's father and mother immigrated from Slovakia into western Pennsylvania around the turn of the century. And, so there's a category of human that's an adventurer. There's a category of human that is seeking a better life than perhaps the geographic area where they're from. We certainly see that on our southern border, and I won't get political about anything, but there are types of people that are adventurous and are called to do something. And if I think of all the stuff that's been invented, I'll just talk about in my father's era, the television set and the automobile and rockets and planes and right. I mean, if everybody stayed on the farm, we wouldn't have any of that stuff. So I think some of us are called to go be that person. And I'm going to put it back on you in a second, but I grew up in Milwaukee. Most of my high school went to the University of Wisconsin. And I chose to come to the University of Minnesota because I wanted to hit the reset button. I wanted to figure out, well, who are you supposed to be that might be different than who you were in high school? And I came up here by myself with a random roommate, and basically I've been here ever since. So you made the same decision 27 years ago to figure out who you were supposed to be.
That's a great point. One of I'm going to make a deduction from that, and I could be right or wrong. Would you agree that the choice to hit the reset button, which I think is amazing. I think we as humans, we have sometimes this luxury to hit the reset button if we want to start over. I think it's awesome that we live in a day and age where we actually can do that. But would you say that luxury of hitting the reset button resides with people who either have the confidence or have the potential to build the confidence? Or are you going to say everybody has the potential to build the confidence? Because not everybody, unfortunately, can hit the reset button or choose not to hit the reset button. Does it really come down to the confidence or lack thereof?
You're right, and that's a complicated situation because culturally, today I know more people that are like me than there are people unlike me. Right? Naturally, it's where you spend your time. But you can think of the slice of society in the United States, which is middle class to upper class, where it's assumed you're going to go to college and it's assumed you're going to go somewhere because it's not going to be online in your parents' basement. When you and I made our decision, right, years and years and years ago, and my buddies went to Wisconsin and Dartmouth and Yale and Harvard, and they went all the way across because it was assumed they were going to do that. Right? Some of them were more comfortable than others, which is what you were just alluding to. Are some people more predisposed to do that kind of thing? So the answer is yes. It's easier for some and harder for others. That's a fact, right? And if it's assumed you will do that, then you kind of have an excuse for making an attempt, as opposed to somebody that's the first generation from their family to go to college. That's a little bit different situation. And I talked to schools about some of those, I'll call them first gen students. So there's no easy answer to that, Sherrod.
Yep, agreed. So I remember this was probably in 2001 or two, something like that. I worked for corporate America at that time. I started this business about 10, 15 years ago, but this was before that. And at that time, I was in a phase of personal growth. So I would listen to a lot of Tony Robbins and, the whole genre of who am I and what do I want in life type of. And back then we had audio tapes. And so I'd go to the public library and pick up the audio tapes, listen to the series of those. And then, of course, we graduated to CDs. CDs were so cool back then.
Yeah.
And, so, and I'd also taken the Myers-Briggs and a whole slew of other personality, those categorization type of tests to see, okay, who the heck am I? And I took those. And after I took those, John, I very quickly realized this is not, I love the tapes, but the tests, I think they were labeling me and branding me as something based on someone else's opinion of who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And I took these and they were slotting me in something that I really didn't want to be in. Maybe I was there, but I didn't want to be there. So you've got these psychological assessments, psychological profiling. I think they're horrible, because what if it says you're an introvert and blah and this and that? All of a sudden, what's that going to do to your confidence of striking up a conversation on a trail in, middle of nowhere? That's not helping you, because if you start regurgitating that identity over and over because, some stupid survey said that, that's going to ruin, in some cases, maybe it helps with relationships, but, it really, you're really letting someone else define who you are rather than you sort of organically, intrinsically trying to define who you are. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think there was a good intention when some of those really smart people just started designing those surveys. I think there were two parts to this, and you can't quote me on it because I didn't study it and I've taken them. Number one is I want to help to identify John so that I can tell anybody who may want to hire him where he will succeed and where he might need additional resources to become the person in that position. I may also want to help John by helping him understand where his strengths are and where his weaknesses are, and then it'll be up to John to decide what he wants to work on. So, I think the intentions were good, but it's really funny. I wish I could remember as much stuff as I want to remember. Sometime over the last 2 weeks, I reread a brief piece on students that were told that they were exceptional students, and a teacher who was an assessment was taken by all the students, and it was fake. And the purpose of the study by the studiers was, we are going to label some of these kids for this teacher, and we will see how it turns out. There was no rhyme nor reason. There was no mathematical reason why Sherrod was an overachiever and John was a loser, right? But what they found out is the students that were identified to the teacher as having above average skills turned out having above average outcomes because they were treated differently. So it's really interesting, as you're saying, and you've read books on parenting, and it's like, if you keep telling your kid he's a loser, he's gonna become a loser, or he's got so much fortitude that he will rise up above that label and prove to you that he's not, right? People settle with how they've been identified in many cases, but yeah, we're on that time. We can go pretty deep. I want to make sure in our time together we cover the stuff about relationship building that you want to get to, but yeah, being labeled is bad and sometimes very difficult to overcome.
Right, because the moment you are labeled, that's one more impediment for you to being able to hit the reset button. Because now if the whole, I'd heard someone say that, and it was so counterintuitive and so anti-logic. It says, never become eminent in any field.
Okay.
Because that's all people will think of you. Because I may be the best, baseball player when I was 25, but at 45, I could care less about baseball, but the whole world still sees me as a baseball player.
Uh-huh. Yeah, your identity.
It becomes your label. So there is that peril. But let's go to a different topic. Okay, let's let's go back to the topic of what makes people happy. And, as I was toying with the idea of what to call this podcast, I had two things that came to mind. One was building relationships in America, or the pursuit of happiness. The reason I was thinking of, talking within that context is in America, I think it's a very uniquely American thing where people, and I think I felt that as someone who immigrated to America many years ago. People will leave you alone if you choose to be left alone, which can be a beautiful thing. You work hard, you mind your own business, people will not bother you. You pay your bills on time, lead a good moral life, and you'll be fine. You will excel at whatever you choose to excel in if you do all the right things. No one will get into your business. And I think there are other countries that have varying degrees of leaving people alone. But I think America is probably at the pinnacle of it in many ways, because it's got, we started in this country with a blank slate, and we said we're going to build an ideal society. Part of being an ideal society is, let's be judgment free. Let's give people the second chance. Let's give people the chance to hit the reset button. Come to this country, hit the reset button. You may think you were something, other people may think you were something, but if you're a hardworking person, if you're moral and all that, yes, we'll stay out of your business. You do what you need to do. You be you.
Yeah.
So with that, one of the things I found pretty amazing, actually, I would say, very liberating, just to observe, is how easy it is to go rent a U-Haul, throw all your stuff in there, and start driving. And a lot of times, and we all know these stories, people will throw their stuff in the back of their SUV, they start driving. There are enough songs about this. We can go into country songs and we can go into classic rock. I could name a few right off the top of my head, like, I'm throwing stuff into my car and it's so uniquely American. But then that freedom and that ability to reset does insulate you to some degree from society, because I think the society is conditioned to leave you alone, even if they don't want to leave you alone. Even if they feel you need help, you may be the most lonely neighbor, not you, but one may be the most lonely neighbor, and the whole neighborhood knows this guy or gal never talks to anyone. People may not make much of an effort to go strike up that conversation. They won't do that because that's how, unfortunately, the society is programmed. In some cases, leaving people alone works great. In some cases, not so much. How do you overcome that? How do you fill that gap somehow?
Yeah, you packed a lot into that setup for that question about packing up the U-Haul and heading up across the country. Yes, that happens, and it's not difficult, right? But you ask yourself, why does John Gabus want to move to Redondo Beach, California? There's a why behind that. If I've got a huge network of friends in Minneapolis, why would I want to do that? The why matters, but you're super right on when you talk about the fact that somebody can move to Minneapolis and it's known as Minnesota nice, and yet have trouble breaking in. And I think there are a variety of factors. I mentioned David Hoyle a while back about confidence, right? What confidence does Sherrod have that if he passes me in a Starbucks and we're standing in line, it's not like passing each other on a hiking trail, we're standing in line right next to each other, one in front of the other. What stops me from asking you some simple question to start that question? And it goes back in my mind to David Hoy talking about confidence. And that's number one. And number two, maybe I'm the kind of guy that some people are introverted and they're less social. So there are some people that want to be. I had lunch today with a guy who wants to be a more effective networker, and he was asking me which books. I said, dude, just sit down and have lunch with me. It's really simple. I'll show you how to operationalize it. But I think moving into a new community, which is kind of what you're implying, right, there are people, number one, that want to be left alone. And I think that's a minority, by the way. And there are people that want to have a social connection. And how do they go about getting that social connection? I'll say, to your point, anybody that wants to be left alone, you're in the right spot. You can go, you're in America, you can move to a new apartment building and you can say hi at the elevator, and that's the extent of it, right? You don't ever have to ask a question, right? And if you don't ask a question, you're not going to learn enough to have somebody ask you something back, other than, is it hot enough for you or cold enough for you or something like that, right? But assuming you're somebody that wants to build those relationships, you have to get engaged in something. Whether it's you're blessed to be able to go into an office, well, then engage with your coworkers. I mean, you just don't have a choice. And if you're unfortunate enough to be a only work from home person, then I encourage you to go out and do some of your shopping. And if you have faith, so it's really interesting in that, as I was preparing for this, you floated the topic at a pretty high level. I have a really good friend, his name is Dan Buettner, and he started the Blue Zones Project. And if you're not familiar with it,
I did look it up after you mentioned it.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with it, for those that may listen, he first went to discover the oldest, most successful agers on the planet. And there's diet and there's exercise, but two of his 9 pillars were something called Moai, which is in Okinawa, Japan. It's 3 people. It might be you and I and Joe Hines, that would get together and be buddies for 50 years. You have somebody else that cares about you, right? And one is a sense of purpose, and the other one is faith was one of the pillars. People that had that practice a religion, right? You could say you're a Christian, but if you don't ever go to church, you're not getting the benefit of identifying with being a Christian. You actually have to go be around those other people and do activities that support you. So to hinting to some member of the audience that might listen to this in the future, you move somewhere, you got to find organizations to get attached to. And it could be, Meals on Wheels, Habitat for Humanity, Feed My Starving Children, going to church. You need to go to connect to things that you have some sort of passion about, hopefully. And then you walk into the room of the organization, you're going to find people that have at least one trait in common with you, caring about that cause, right? And then you have to go. Like a gentleman that I met, I'm just going to say 1.5 years ago, who moved to Minneapolis from Texas, but he was like you. He was originally from India, and he said that he didn't connect. And I said, "Do you go to church?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Well, do you go early and stay late?" "No." I said, "Dude," "how does somebody know you? You walk in like everybody else, you leave like everybody else. If you're not going to stop at a table and have a conversation with somebody." And it was really interesting. And I also made one other comment. I said, everybody here that you're passing, in theory, has a full life. They've got kids that are filling up their day. And so, you have to reach out to them. They don't necessarily know you want to have a conversation. You gotta take, if you're one of those, I talked about the introvert that doesn't want to make friends, and I talked about somebody that wants to build connections, you got to take the first step.
Yeah, so just digging a little bit deeper into it. So when we talk about faith-based networking, or I would say a place of worship-based networking, how much of that is just the place of worship being that congregation point where the ice breaking is easy, versus having that deep spiritual sense of purpose and meaning and so on, which is giving rise to better relationships and longer life and more happiness and so on? Because there is just the convenience of, hey, 500 people are showing up here every Sunday, and if I do that sermon at 9 a.m. every Sunday, a few weeks down the road, I'll probably recognize many faces, and yes, I've got the repetitive networking opportunity with the same people, versus we all have the same value system, moral system, this system, that system, and so on. Well, actually, that's actually a moral statement, just to break religion down into, I guess, different things. So there's the uniform morality definition, there's a congregation convenience definition, and then there is the spiritual, what's the purpose of life in that definition. So talk to me about the different aspects of the place of worship and how they lead up to better relationships and so on.
I'll say that it's giggling in that when I grew up Christian and still am. When I grew up, in a Catholic mass, the congregants didn't talk to each other. We went in and we sat in the pew. We started with a song, a hymn, and then the service began. And then they introduced, turn to your somebody left or right and give them the sign of peace. Okay, so they started to drive engagement in the service. And the place where my wife and I go to church now, they put a name tag station at the entrances to the church, and you write your first name and and there's a question, and it's like somebody you admire or a sport you played or something. And right after the opening part of the service, okay, now turn to somebody near you and answer this question. Right. So there is structured relationship building, right? There are people it's easier for and people that's more difficult for. So, some of those things are getting wrapped in there, and I haven't even gotten to the shared beliefs in the faith and how that draws you together. But I've visited churches in cities I've never been to and been surprised that, some older person said, "Hey, you're new here." That's not that common. I've been to a variety of churches. That's not that common that somebody's going to greet a stranger. That's somebody that's there every Sunday. They know you're new, right? They know,
yeah.
right? That's somebody that's there every Sunday, right? And so getting to the faith belief part of why you're there, there is a benefit because you have something in common already with everybody in that building. In theory, we're not perfect, we're all sinners and stuff like that, but the point is you have an intention to live your life a specific way. And I think churches are a good place for somebody new to a community to go explore meeting people. And I'm not telling you how strong your faith should be in whatever swim lane that you've chosen to be in, but and like Dan said in his Blue Zones, people that practice a faith live longer. And if you tie that back, Sherrod, to a conversation you and I had a while back about the Harvard study about longevity and health, study that goes back to 85 years, give or take, and they found that relationships were the key to long and happy and healthy lives. So, you have to take some of that 85-year data and some of my buddy Dan Buettner's studies about having a faith trait in common. There must be something to it, right? I can't prove it, but if they get the data and they've done the research, I believe it.
I just was reminded of, by the way, I get a lot of my wisdom from movies, especially sci-fi movies. So you remember the movie Matrix?
Yeah,
Maybe.
this is going to be a giggle between the two of us. I've seen part of the first. I've seen part of the first one, but you keep going.
Okay, so there's a line in that movie. So robots have taken over the world, and they farm human beings for energy. So that's what's happening in Matrix. So human beings are not having long lives. So the robot, who actually has a human form, he's like, "We have studied your species. You guys need problems to survive. And that's why we injected some software in your brain so you start worrying about things, because that actually helps you live longer." I think when we are in a community, we have these shared interests and we want to help each other. I may be fully content. I may be a billionaire with all my private jets and so on. I have no problem in the world. But I don't have that sense of connectivity and wanting to help. And I think to have a problem and to try to solve a problem sometimes gives purpose and makes you live longer. So anyway, I know I kind of brought in like Matrix along with this thing, but I see what you're saying there.
By the way, as you're thinking of the next question, purpose is one of the 9 pillars of the Blue Zones. In Japan, they call it ikigai, which is, why am I getting out of bed today? And if you don't have purpose, and that's why people, they don't have a word in their vocabulary for retirement. Okay, and so you're right. If you don't have purpose, you're not going to become the kind of person that you would want to have in your network.
True. Well, I know why I get out of bed, but this is a professional show. Maybe I'll talk about it on the medical podcast.
Yep.
So, all right. So, okay. Back to the American experience. I'll touch upon this topic, and I think we have so much to talk about, but maybe we'll probably do another one sometime down the road if you're willing to come back. coming to America, we've talked about churches, we talked about religion, and how churches help build communities and help with networking. I think it would be fair to say, and I think there's enough literature and data out there to say America is, generally speaking, a more religious country than most of the world. Europe is generally considered less religious. I grew up in India, which, there's no concept of congregation per se in Hinduism. So yes, there is a value system, there is a belief system. Well, I wouldn't say even there's a belief system, there's a seeking system. But there is, the concept of congregation isn't quite there. So in that sense, there is no religion. But coming to this country, I've seen Christians becoming more Christian, Muslims become more Muslim, Hindus become more Hindu, because this country, it gives, religion becomes that place where people network. Do you think that's a good thing? We should be becoming more religious for the sake of networking?
Well, I think that what you really described to me is less about faith and more about sense of belonging.
Correct.
Hindus are getting together with Hindus more often, Muslims getting together with Muslims more often, the same with Jews, the same with Christians. Okay. So that just kind of reinforces, common traits amongst people, right? And I think it's good to have something to believe in. I'm not a theologian, and I can't tell you what's different between, the Jewish faith and the Christian faith, other than the fact that the Jews think Jesus Christ was a prophet and not the Son of God. Okay, but they still follow the basic 10 commandments. I think it's good to follow something that's bigger than yourself. All right, so I think that's a good thing. And if the faith, as long as it's not like human sacrifice, strange stuff, I think a faith is a really good thing to be a part of. It puts something above yourself, and it brings people together, and you've got people in that building, congregation, whatever you want to call it, that are in a way your accountability partner. Well, I have to go to church again this Sunday. Maybe, but Sharon's gonna not see me, and I see Sharon every Sunday, and so I think even though I'm a little bit tired, let's just go. Even though I can watch from home, so I think it's a good thing, the camaraderie that is built in worshiping together, whatever your faith is. And I could keep talking, but I think I answered your question.
Yes, you did. Thank you. So I did promise that's my last question. So thank you, John. So many different random tangential thoughts came to my mind, and I did not bring them up today because I think we've been at this about almost 40 minutes or more, but would love to have you back. Thanks for doing this. And we really didn't talk a whole lot about technology, which is really what Perceptive is all about, and how you and I met. But at some point in a future conversation, I want to somehow relate some of these concepts to how do we build better software to do some of these things as they relate to challenges in networking and social relationships and so on. So thanks again. And
I enjoyed it. As I said, I loved talking about it with respect to life and not career success. And you're right. I'll look forward to listening to this when it comes out of production and making notes about other topics I think that we just passed by and didn't dig into deeply enough. And I accept your offer to come back and have a second conversation about that. I really look forward to it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. And I do have a closing line. It's called Be Curious, Ask Questions, and Be Perceptive. See you next time.
Yeah, I like it.
See ya.
Thanks, Sharon. Take care.